My name is Victoria Langford, but for a long time that name felt like it belonged to someone else. In most rooms, I was introduced as Ethan's wife, and people nodded politely, as if that explained everything they needed to know about me. For 14 years, I believed I was part of a solid marriage. Not the kind that sweeps you off your feet or fills your days with dramatic romance, but one that felt stable, respectable, and safe. We lived in a beautiful colonial-style house in Bellevue, Washington, just across the lake from Seattle. The kind of house people slowed down to admire when they drove past. White trim, tall windows, a carefully maintained lawn that always looked perfect, even in winter. Ethan was a vice president at a fast-growing software company focused on cloud security. His career was impressive, especially to people who didn't know him well. He spoke confidently, dressed sharply, and always seemed to be on the brink of something bigger. I worked part-time as a content strategist for a mid-sized digital agency in downtown Seattle. It wasn't flashy, but I was good at it. I helped brands shape their voice, build trust, and connect with people. I liked the quiet creativity of it, the feeling that words could actually matter. From the outside, our life looked enviable. We hosted holiday dinners, attended charity events, and took an annual ski trip to Whistler that friends loved to hear about. We smiled in photos, stood close, and played our roles well. People told me all the time how lucky I was. And for years I believed them. What I didn't notice at first was how slowly the warmth faded. Didn't disappear all at once. It thinned like air at high altitude, until breathing felt harder, but I couldn't explain why. Somewhere along the way, the conversations that once stretched late into the night turned into short exchanges about schedules and responsibilities. The laughter became rare. The pauses became long. Ethan's rise at the company changed the rhythm of our lives. Or maybe it just stripped away the illusion. After his major promotion 4 years earlier, work became everything. Late nights were no longer occasional. They were expected. Business trips multiplied. His phone was always nearby, lighting up with messages even during dinner. When he came home, he was either distracted or exhausted. Our conversations turned into checklists. Did I schedule the cleaner? Could I handle the HOA meeting? Was the car serviced? He spoke as if our home were another department he oversaw. I told myself this was normal. This was what ambition looked like. Tech was demanding. High-level roles came with sacrifices. I reminded myself that many couples lived like this and survived just fine. So I swallowed the loneliness that settled into the house during those long evenings when he shut himself away in his study. Door closed, headphones on. I would sit in the living room with a glass of water, watching shows I didn't really care about, scrolling on my phone, telling myself that quiet didn't mean unhappy. But quiet can be very loud when it stretches on long enough. About 2 years ago, something shifted in a way I never could have planned. One night, unable to sleep, I lay awake while Ethan slept soundly beside me. His breathing was steady, untroubled. I reached for my phone, not looking for anything in particular, just trying to distract myself from the restlessness I couldn't name. That's when I saw an advertisement for a language learning app. Korean. The word alone stirred something deep inside me. I had taken an introductory Korean class in college, back when my life felt open and undefined. I had been an art history major then, dreaming of museum work, travel, maybe even living abroad for a while. I remembered loving the language instantly. The clean logic of Hangul, the rhythm of the sentences, the feeling that learning it was like opening a door into a completely different way of thinking. But that version of me belonged to another lifetime. I met Ethan during my senior year. We graduated, found jobs, got married quickly, chose stability, practicality. Those old dreams were packed away quietly, labeled unrealistic, and placed somewhere I didn't look very often. That night, without overthinking it, I downloaded the app, just to see if I remembered anything. I expected frustration, maybe disappointment. Instead, recognition flooded back. The alphabet felt familiar. The sounds came naturally. I sat up in bed, heart beating faster, repeating words under my breath so softly Ethan wouldn't wake. Within days I was hooked. Learning Korean became the highlight of my evenings. After dinner, while Ethan reviewed reports or took work calls, I sat at the kitchen island with my earbuds in, focused and alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I subscribed to beginner podcasts, started watching Korean shows with subtitles, then gradually without them. Each small victory filled me with a quiet pride I didn't share with anyone. I didn't tell Ethan about it. Not because I was intentionally hiding something, but because experience had taught me not to expect encouragement. Early in our marriage, I had once told him I wanted to take a pottery class. I'd been excited talking about working with clay, about learning something with my hands. He laughed, not cruelly but dismissively, and said we already had plenty of bowls. He asked when I would even find the time, reminded me how tired I always was after work. I laughed along, embarrassed, and never brought it up again. After that, I learned to keep the things that mattered to me private. It hurt less than watching them be minimized. So Korean became my secret, my quiet rebellion. I practiced every day, sometimes for hours. I found online tutors, joined study groups, and started reading simple webtoons and short stories. The language stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like home. By the end of the first year, I could hold conversations. By 18 months, I was fluent enough to follow fast-paced shows, jokes, and cultural references. I didn't just understand the words. I understood the tone. More importantly, I understood myself again. Every new phrase reminded me that I was still capable of learning, still growing, still more than the role I had slowly shrunk into. I wasn't just managing a household. I wasn't just supporting someone else's ambition. I was still a person with curiosity, intelligence, and depth. Then, one evening in October, everything changed. Ethan came home earlier than usual, energy radiating off him. He dropped his briefcase near the door and smiled in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Real excitement, the kind that made him seem younger. "Vic, I've got incredible news," he said. I was folding laundry in the living room and looked up, surprised. "What is it?" "We're on the verge of landing a massive partnership with a Korean conglomerate, Hontech Industries. This could change everything for me. Their executive vice president, Mr. Kong Min-soo, is flying in next week. I'm taking him to dinner at Canlis. And you're coming with me." Blink. "A business dinner?" "Yes." He specifically asked if I was married. Korean business culture values stability and family. "It makes me look reliable." He walked into the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. "You just need to dress well, smile, and be charming. Kang's English is limited, so I'll be doing most of the talking in Korean. You'll probably be bored, but it's important." My heart skipped. "You speak Korean?" He shrugged, trying to appear casual, but the pride was obvious. "I picked it up over the years working with our Seoul office. I'm basically fluent now. It's one of the reasons I'm being considered for bigger things." He didn't ask if I spoke it. Didn't even consider the possibility. I smiled and said I'd be there. That night, long after he went to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My thoughts raced. For the first time in years, I felt anticipation instead of dread. I was about to hear a conversation Ethan believed was private. I would finally understand how he spoke when he thought I was invisible. The week before the dinner passed slowly. I prepared quietly, reviewing business terminology, practicing formal speech, making sure I wouldn't miss a word. I didn't know what I expected to hear. Maybe nothing. Maybe confirmation that I'd imagined the distance. But a part of me knew something important was coming. Friday arrived. I wore the black dress Ethan had chosen, pearl earrings and low heels. In the mirror I looked composed, elegant, and exactly how he wanted me to look. On the drive into Seattle, the city lights reflected on the water, and my stomach twisted with nerves. At the restaurant, Ethan reminded me to stay quiet and pleasant, to let him lead. Mr. Kong was already seated when we arrived. He greeted us warmly. The early conversation stayed in English, polite and safe. Water was poured into crystal glasses. Then, naturally, the conversation shifted into Korean. And I listened. Once the conversation shifted into Korean, The atmosphere at the table subtly changed. Ethan straightened in his chair, his posture more confident, his gestures broader. This was his stage. He spoke with ease, using polite business honorifics, laughing at the right moments, explaining his company's vision with practiced enthusiasm. If I hadn't understood the language, I might have been impressed in the simple way people often are when they hear fluency they can't verify. But I did understand. Every word, every pause, every implication hidden between phrases. They talked about integration timelines, data protection laws, regional compliance issues. Ethan painted a picture of himself as indispensable, the bridge between cultures, the executive who could make everything run smoothly. He spoke as though he alone carried the company forward, glossing over the teams he managed, the people who actually executed much of the work. I noticed how easily he took credit, how naturally it came to him when he believed no one at the table could challenge him. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, nodding politely when either of them glanced my way. I played the role perfectly, the agreeable wife, the decoration. Then Mr. Kong turned toward me with a kind smile and asked in clear Korean, what kind of work I did. Before I could even consider responding, Ethan answered for me. "Oh, Victoria works in marketing at a small agency," he said lightly. "Nothing particularly demanding. It's more of something to keep her occupied. She mainly takes care of things at home." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were shocking, but because they were so effortless. My work, my experience, my intelligence reduced to a pastime. Something to fill time. Something insignificant. I felt a brief, sharp urge to speak. To correct him. To let Mr. Kong know exactly who I was. But I stayed silent. My face remained calm. Years of practice had taught me how to swallow reactions and present composure instead. Mr. Kong nodded politely and moved on, though I noticed a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. The courses continued to arrive, each one carefully presented, elegant, almost ceremonial. I ate slowly, more out of habit than appetite. Ethan relaxed further as the evening went on. His voice grew looser, more familiar. The more comfortable he became, the less guarded his words were. Mr. Kong mentioned the pressure of high-level roles and the importance of family support. Ethan laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made my shoulders tense. "To be honest," Ethan said in Korean, lowering his voice slightly, "my wife doesn't really understand the complexities of this industry. She's content with a simpler life. I handle all the important decisions. Finances, investments, long-term planning. She's great at managing the home and looking presentable at events like this. It works well for me. I don't have to deal with a partner who demands too much or has ambitions that complicate things." My chest tightened. The way he said it was casual, almost proud, as if he were describing an efficient system rather than a marriage. As if I were a convenience, carefully designed to fit around his life. Mr. Kong made a neutral sound in response, but his posture shifted. He listened carefully now, more than before. Ethan continued, clearly enjoying himself. "The executive promotion is essentially guaranteed," he said. "After that, I'm positioning myself for even higher leadership. I've already started restructuring assets, setting up accounts abroad, diversifying holdings. Just smart planning. If I need to relocate or make major moves, I don't want to be slowed down by joint approvals or unnecessary discussions." My hands clenched slightly in my lap. Accounts abroad. Restructuring assets. Words that sounded far too deliberate to be harmless. I understood enough to know what he was implying. He was moving money without me. Planning a future that did not include shared decision-making. Possibly not including me at all. Then came the moment that shattered whatever illusions I had left. Mr. Kong asked how Ethan managed the stress that came with such responsibility. Ethan laughed again, this time louder. "I have my outlets," he said. "There's someone at work. Lauren. She's in corporate strategy. We've been seeing each other for about 8 months now. My wife has no idea. Honestly, it's been good for me. Lauren understands ambition. We talk strategy, plans, growth. It's refreshing after coming home to someone whose main concerns are daily routines. The room seemed to tilt. My vision narrowed, though my face remained still. Months. An entire parallel life I hadn't seen. He said it without shame, without hesitation, as if it were a clever solution to a minor inconvenience. Mr. Kang's discomfort was unmistakable now. His responses shortened. His gaze shifted away from Ethan more often. He steered the conversation back to neutral topics, focusing on technicalities rather than personal matters. The energy at the table cooled rapidly. I sat there, breathing evenly, my body rigid with control. Inside, something fundamental broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the way something gives way after being under strain for too long. When the evening finally ended, the goodbye was formal and restrained. Mr. Kang bowed to Ethan, then turned to me. In careful English, he said it was a pleasure meeting me and wished me happiness. His eyes held mine for a brief moment longer than necessary. There was something there. Recognition, perhaps, or sympathy. The drive home was quiet. Ethan seemed pleased, humming softly, satisfied with his performance. He told me the meeting had gone well. He said I'd done great. He kissed my forehead absently when we arrived home and disappeared into his study. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and stood there in the dark for a long time. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel everything I had suppressed at the table. The betrayal, the humiliation, the grief for a marriage I had believed in long after it had stopped existing in any real sense. Eventually I reached for my phone and called Mia. She answered quickly, concern in her voice. I told her I needed a lawyer. My voice broke as I spoke, but once I started I couldn't stop. I told her everything. Every word I'd heard. The affair. The hidden money. The way he spoke about me as if I were an accessory rather than a partner. Mia listened quietly, then spoke with calm precision. She told me not to confront him. Not yet. She explained that emotional reactions could cost me leverage. She told me to document everything. Financial records, emails, accounts, anything I could access legally. The next morning I called in sick. Ethan barely noticed. Once he left, I went into his study. He was meticulous, organized, confident that no one would ever look closely. I photographed statements, saved documents, copied files. I found transfers that made my stomach turn. Large sums moved to accounts in his name alone. Properties I didn't know existed. Evidence that this wasn't impulsive, but planned. For weeks I lived two lives. One where I smiled and nodded and played my role. Another where I gathered proof and prepared to leave. I met Mia quietly. We built a case piece by piece. When the divorce papers were finally filed and served, it felt unreal. When his company placed him on leave pending investigation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The confrontation, when it came, was brief and devastating. He denied, then begged, then accused. When I told him I understood everything he'd said, his face collapsed. He asked how long I'd been hiding it. I told him the truth. I packed what I needed and walked out. The months that followed were exhausting. Legal meetings, negotiations, discovery. But I was no longer confused. The clarity I'd gained at that dinner stayed with me, anchored me. And then, when I least expected it, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Kang. He had heard about the divorce. He said his company was opening a North American headquarters and needed someone who understood both cultures deeply. Someone who could communicate, not just translate. When I met him, I spoke Korean from the first moment. His smile was immediate. He told me he had suspected that night. The way I listened, the way I didn't flinch. The offer he made changed my life. But that came later. For now, what mattered was this. The woman who had sat silently at that table was gone. In her place stood someone who understood her worth, her voice, and her future. And I was no longer willing to be invisible. The meeting with Mr. Kang marked the beginning of a life I hadn't known was possible, but it didn't erase the difficult months that followed. Those months were slow, methodical, and emotionally draining in ways I hadn't anticipated. Leaving Ethan was one decisive act, but untangling 14 years of shared life required patience and stamina I didn't know I had. The legal process moved forward in stages. Paperwork, depositions, financial disclosures that revealed just how carefully Ethan had planned his exit from our marriage. Every document confirmed what I had already learned at that dinner. He hadn't been improvising. He had been preparing. Accounts had been separated quietly. Assets shifted gradually. He had assumed I would never notice, never question, never understand. That assumption became his greatest mistake. Mia handled everything with precision. She never raised her voice, never postured. She simply presented facts, timelines, and numbers that told a story Ethan couldn't talk his way out of. When his legal team attempted to downplay the offshore accounts, the documentation spoke louder than any argument. When they tried to frame the properties as premarital investments, purchase dates and funding sources contradicted them. I watched the process from a distance, emotionally detached in a way that surprised me. The anger I expected didn't dominate my days. Instead, there was clarity, a clean, steady sense that I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. Ethan tried briefly to appeal to memory. He spoke about our early years, the trips we'd taken, the plans we'd once made. He apologized, though never fully. His apologies were careful, conditional, focused more on consequences than harm. When that didn't work, he shifted to frustration, then to blame. He accused me of being secretive, of deceiving him by hiding my language skills. I didn't argue. There was nothing left to explain. When the settlement was finalized, the outcome was decisive. The hidden accounts were disclosed and divided. The properties were liquidated or transferred according to court order. Spousal maintenance was established for a defined period, not as charity, but as acknowledgement of the financial imbalance he had engineered. I moved into a temporary apartment overlooking Lake Washington. It wasn't large, but it was quiet. Mornings there felt different. I woke without tension, without anticipation of someone else's schedule or mood. I made breakfast slowly. I drank water while watching the light shift across the surface of the lake. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful rather than empty. The offer from Hontech arrived formally a few weeks later. The role was Director of Global Marketing for their North American operations. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't an apology on someone else's behalf. It was recognition. I accepted. The first day I walked into their Seattle office, I introduced myself in Korean. The room stilled. Conversations paused. Then smiles appeared, genuine and surprised. I wasn't the novelty. I wasn't the spouse. I was the professional. The work was demanding. The expectations were high. But for the first time, my effort translated directly into growth rather than maintenance. Built teams. I traveled. I negotiated contracts. I mentored younger professionals who reminded me of the person I might have been if I hadn't learned to make myself smaller. Years passed more quickly than I expected. My career flourished. The projects I led received recognition. I was invited into rooms where decisions were made, not because of who I was married to, but because of what I contributed. I learned to trust my voice again, to speak without rehearsing how it might be received. Personally, my life settled into something steady and self-directed. Dated occasionally. Some connections lasted longer than others. None demanded that I disappear to make them comfortable. I learned to recognize the difference between companionship and dependency. Ethan reached out once, years later. Brief message. He said he hoped I was well. He said he regretted how things ended. I read it once and deleted it. Not out of anger, out of completion. I continued studying Korean, not as a strategy, but as pleasure. I read novels slowly, savoring language the way some people savor music. I hosted small gatherings with friends who shared an interest in culture and conversation. I traveled when I wanted to, where I wanted to. Now, looking back, I understand that the dinner at Canlis was never just a betrayal. It was a revelation. It stripped away the version of my life that relied on being perceived rather than being known. It forced me to confront a truth I had avoided for years. That invisibility, when accepted long enough, becomes a habit. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When someone consistently speaks over you, dismisses your growth, or treats your presence as decorative, listen closely. Not just to their words, but to what they assume you'll never understand. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is learn quietly. Observe carefully. Prepare patiently. And when the moment comes, step forward fully. You don't need permission to reclaim your voice. You don't need validation to choose yourself. And you don't need to explain your worth to anyone who never bothered to see it. The woman who once smiled politely at a table where she was underestimated no longer exists. In her place stands someone whole. And that is more than enough. Have you ever been humiliated so casually that no one around you even noticed it happened? Not shouted at, not insulted outright. Just quietly reduced to something smaller than everyone else at the table. That was how it started for me. It was supposed to be a simple family brunch. Nothing dramatic. Just another gathering at my parents' house. The same house with polished wood floors and oversized windows that made everything inside look more important than it actually was. I arrived 10 minutes early like I always did. Early enough to help. Early enough not to be in the way. My name is Leah Morrison, and for most of my adult life my family had already decided who I was. I was the safe one. The practical one. The one who didn't aim high enough. They never said it directly. They didn't have to. It lived in their tone, their jokes, the way conversations changed when I entered the room. That morning, the table was already set when I walked in. Real china for everyone else. Heavy silverware that clinked softly when moved. In front of my chair sat a single white plastic fork and knife. First I thought it was a mistake. Then my father noticed my pause. He laughed. "Plastic's fine for her," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "She's used to things that don't last." The words landed hard. Not loud. Not angry. Comfortable. Laughter followed. My uncle chuckled into his napkin. My cousin smirked. My sister didn't even bother hiding her eye roll. My mother didn't look up. I felt every pair of eyes flick toward me, waiting. Measuring. Curious to see if I would react. I didn't. I sat down slowly and picked up the plastic fork. It bent slightly between my fingers. Focused on my breathing. On the sound of plates being passed. On my grandmother beside me, who gently placed her hand over mine like she sensed the shift. "Eat," she whispered softly. "Don't let them rush you." He nodded. The thing was, this wasn't new. The plastic fork was just the first time they made it visible. For years I had been the afterthought. My sister Rachel was the star. Married well. Loud personality. Always had something impressive to announce. My cousins chased careers that sounded important even when they weren't stable. And me. I married Daniel. Quiet. Grounded. Uninterested in impressing anyone. That alone had sealed my position. "He's nice," my mother had said when I introduced him. That was the beginning and end of her interest. At the table, conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Rachel leaned toward Dad. "Seriously, why did we even invite her? This was supposed to be a classy brunch." I swallowed. "I'm here because Grandma asked me," I said calmly. "It's her birthday." Grandma squeezed my hand. "And I'm glad she came," she said firmly. No one responded. The food arrived. Roasted vegetables. Fresh bread. I tried cutting the meat. The plastic fork bent again. My uncle noticed and laughed. "Careful there. Don't break it." More laughter. Something settled inside me then. Not anger. Awareness. They weren't teasing me because they disliked me. They were teasing me because they didn't respect me. And they felt safe doing it. I finished my meal quietly. When dessert came out, I stood. "I'm going to head out," I said. No one protested. No one cared. Except Grandma, who hugged me tightly at the door. You're stronger than they think, she whispered. Don't forget that. I didn't answer, because at that moment I realized something important. I had spent years trying to earn respect from people who benefited from my silence. And I was done. That night, Daniel noticed before I said anything. He always did. You okay? He asked as we sat on the couch, lights low, city quiet outside. I think I finally understand them, I said. He waited. They don't see me as less because I failed, I continued. They see me as less because I didn't perform success the way they like. He nodded slowly. And you don't owe anyone a performance, he said. That was when I decided. Not to confront them. Not to argue. Not to prove anything. But to stop protecting them from the consequences of how they treated me. Over the next few weeks, I changed nothing on the outside. I still smiled politely when I saw them. Still responded briefly when needed. But quietly I pulled back. I stopped covering gaps they didn't know I filled. Stopped smoothing situations behind the scenes. Stopped being the invisible safety net. They noticed in small ways at first. Delay here. A missed favor there. Confusion turned into irritation. Then questions. My mother called one evening. You didn't remind your cousin about the vendor contact, she said. I didn't know I was responsible, I replied calmly. Silence. Another week passed. Then my father called. Did you change something with the account? He asked. I changed what was mine, I said. More silence. The truth was they had never asked what I did. They assumed. They assumed Daniel and I were scraping by. They assumed my work was small. They assumed plastic forks fit my life. What they didn't know was that my consulting work had grown steadily. That Daniel had quietly become indispensable at his company. That our life was stable, intentional, and far beyond their assumptions. I didn't correct them. I let time do the work. 3 months after that brunch, my father invited the family to another gathering. Formal this time. Important. I declined. Rachel asked why. I don't belong at tables where I'm treated like a joke, I replied. She laughed it off. But the message landed. That was the beginning of the shift. And they felt it. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does with families like mine. It started quietly, with confusion. My mother called more often, her tone carefully neutral, as if she were testing the ground. Rachel said you didn't RSVP for the fundraiser, she mentioned one afternoon. I didn't, I replied. Oh, is something wrong? I almost laughed. Something had always been wrong. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. I'm busy, I said simply. That was the first time I felt it, the subtle imbalance. They were used to me being available, useful, predictable. When I wasn't, it unsettled them. Few weeks later my father called. This time, his voice carried irritation beneath politeness. I heard you didn't attend your cousin's engagement dinner. I wasn't invited, I said. He paused. Of course you were. No, I replied. You assumed I would come. That's not the same thing. Silence stretched between us. He cleared his throat. You're being sensitive. No, I said evenly. I'm being selective. That word landed harder than I expected. Selective. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was simply true. After that, the narrative started to shift. Not outwardly, not yet, but behind closed doors. I knew because I started getting messages from people who had never cared to check in before. Cousin asking how work was going. An aunt complimenting something she'd heard about me. They were circling, testing, trying to recalibrate their understanding of where I stood. Daniel noticed it too. They're suddenly aware of you, he said one night as we cleaned up after dinner. I've always been here, I replied. He smiled. Exactly. What my family didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was that the consulting work I'd been quietly doing had expanded. Slowly. Intentionally. I didn't chase clients who wanted flash. I worked with people who valued structure, sustainability, and discretion. The kind of people who didn't brag, but paid well. Daniel's work had evolved the same way. He wasn't loud about promotions. He didn't post about milestones. But his name carried weight in rooms my family didn't know existed. And then came the invitation. My father invited me to dinner. Just him and my mother. No extended family. No audience. That alone told me something had changed. I agreed. Not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to see who they were when they couldn't perform. The restaurant was upscale. Familiar. The kind of place my parents liked because it looked important. They were already seated when I arrived. My mother smiled too quickly. My father stood and pulled out my chair. Noticed. We exchanged pleasantries. Then my father leaned back and folded his hands. So, he said, your mother tells me you've been busy. I met his gaze. Yes. With what? He asked. I smiled politely. Work. He nodded slowly. Still consulting. Yes. Still from home. Yes. He waited, as if expecting me to add something impressive. I didn't. My mother finally spoke. Rachel mentioned you turned down an opportunity to collaborate with her friend. I did. Why? She asked, brows knitting together. Because it wasn't aligned, I said calmly. With what? With my goals. They exchanged a glance. That was the moment I realized something important. They weren't worried about my feelings. They were worried about control. My father cleared his throat. You know, Leah. Sometimes pride gets in the way of family. He nodded. It does. He frowned. I wasn't talking about us. I know, I replied. Silence fell. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Dinner ended politely. Too politely. As we stood to leave, my mother touched my arm. You don't have to distance yourself, she said softly. I'm not distancing, I replied. I'm redefining. That night I didn't feel victorious. Felt steady. And that mattered more. The real turning point came a month later. My father hosted a charity event. One he'd been planning for weeks. It mattered to him. His image. His network. I hadn't been invited. Which was fine. Until my phone rang 2 hours before the event. Leah, he said, voice tight. We have a problem. Waited. One of our keynote sponsors pulled out last minute, he continued. We need a replacement. Yes. And someone mentioned you might have connections. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. Request. Took a breath. I do, I said. But they're not available. His jaw tightened. You didn't even check. I don't need to, I replied. They don't work with organizations that exclude people without explanation. He stared at me. This is important, he said sharply. So was my dignity, I replied. I stood up. We're done here. He didn't follow me. That event went poorly. Not disastrously, but noticeably. Whispers started. People ask questions. And when questions start, assumptions crumble. A week later, my sister Rachel called. Her tone was different. Measured. Dad says you're sabotaging him, she said. I laughed softly. He's not entitled to my support. You're acting like you've outgrown us, she snapped. I have, I replied. She went quiet. You think you're better than us now? No, I said gently. I think I finally stopped trying to be less. She hung up. That night, Daniel wrapped his arms around me and whispered, You're handling this with grace. I shook my head. I'm just not apologizing anymore. The fallout came gradually. My father's circle shifted. My mother's social calendar thinned. Not because of me directly, but because once people sensed instability, they moved. Prestige is fragile. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I lived my life. And that, somehow, was the loudest statement of all. The call that changed everything came from someone unexpected. My grandmother. I want you to come over, she said. Just you. I went. She poured tea and sat across from me, eyes sharp despite her age. They talk about you, she said. I know, I replied. They don't understand you, she continued. But they're afraid now. I looked up. Afraid of what? She smiled slightly. That they were wrong. That hit deeper than I expected. They built their pride on being right about everyone, she said. Especially you. I nodded slowly. And now? Yes. They don't know where they stand. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You stood quietly for years, she said. Now let them learn what that strength looks like. I left her house lighter. Not because the conflict was over, but because I knew I wasn't wrong. The next invitation arrived 2 weeks later. A formal family dinner. Everyone invited, including me. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Daniel watched me carefully. You don't have to go, he said. I know, I replied. But you might want to, he added. He nodded. Because this time I wouldn't be bringing a plastic fork. And they knew it. The house looked the same from the outside. White columns. Perfect hedges. Warm lights glowing through tall windows. It was the same place where I'd learned to sit straight, speak softly, and never embarrass anyone. The same place where I was taught that approval had to be earned, and love came with conditions. But when I stepped inside that night, something felt different. The air was heavier. Everyone was already there. My father stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid. My mother hovered near the dining table, adjusting place settings that didn't need adjusting. Rachel sat on the sofa, phone face down for once, her confidence dulled. Aunts and cousins filled the room with low conversation, laughter that sounded practiced. And then there was the table, long polished, immaculate. This time every place setting was porcelain. No plastic, no jokes, no smirks. They had learned. I took my seat without asking permission. No one commented. Dinner began quietly. Too quietly. Silverware clinked. Water glasses were lifted and set down. No one reached for seconds. My father finally cleared his throat. I want to say something, he announced. Every head turned toward him. I didn't move. He looked around the table first, then at me. I've done a lot of thinking, he said slowly. About the brunch. About what I said. Silence. I was wrong. That word landed softly, but its weight echoed. I humiliated you, he continued, voice tighter now. And I did it publicly. I thought it was humor. I thought it was motivation. I raised my eyes to his. It was cruelty, I said calmly. A few people shifted uncomfortably. He nodded. Yes. Rachel looked down. I grew up believing strength meant control, my father went on. That success looked one way. That if someone didn't fit that picture, they needed to be corrected. He swallowed. And I did that to my own daughter. My mother pressed her lips together. I didn't interrupt. I won't ask for forgiveness tonight, he said. I don't deserve it yet. But I wanted you to hear this from me, not through whispers or guilt. I took a slow breath. Why now? I asked. He hesitated. Because when you stopped needing us, everything I built my identity on started to shake. That was the most honest thing he'd ever said. I realized, he continued, that the power I thought I had only existed because you gave it to me. No one spoke. I folded my hands in my lap. You're right, I said. I did give it to you. 4 years. He nodded again. And I won't ask for it back, he said quietly. That surprised me. Dinner resumed after that. Not warm. Not hostile. Just real. After dessert, conversation splintered. Some people retreated to the living room. Others stepped outside. Rachel approached me cautiously. I didn't stop him, she said. Back then. I laughed. I know, I replied. I was afraid, she admitted. If I didn't laugh, he'd turn it on me. I studied her face. That's how cycles work, I said. Someone always pays the cost so others don't have to. She nodded, eyes glassy. I'm sorry, she said. I believed her, but belief didn't mean access. I appreciate that, I replied. But apology doesn't automatically restore closeness. She swallowed. I know. That was enough. Later, my grandmother found me near the window. "You spoke like a woman who knows who she is," she said softly. "I learned it the hard way," I replied. She smiled. "Those lessons stick." Before I left, my father stopped me at the door. "I won't try to control the relationship anymore," he said. "If you want distance, I'll respect it." I looked at him, really looked. "I don't want distance," I said. "I want equality." He nodded once. "Then I'll have to learn." "Yes," I said. "You will." Daniel was waiting in the car. "How did it go?" he asked as I slid into the seat. "It ended," I said. He smiled gently. "That's usually the hardest part." Weeks passed. The family didn't fall apart. They adjusted. My parents became quieter, more careful. Rachel reached out occasionally, without expectation. The aunts stopped commenting on my choices. Not because they suddenly understood me, but because they no longer controlled the narrative. And I didn't need revenge. Because the truth did something far more effective. It rearranged the power. One afternoon, months later, I found the old plastic fork in a drawer I hadn't cleaned out yet. Bent. Flimsy. Forgettable. I held it for a moment, then threw it away. Not in anger. In closure. That night, Daniel kissed my forehead and said, "You know what impressed me most?" "What?" I asked. "You never raised your voice. And somehow, they heard you louder than ever." I smiled. "I wasn't trying to win," I said. "I was trying to be free." And I was. Not because they finally respected me, but because I stopped waiting for it. The autumn sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the historic chapel in Asheville, North Carolina, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor. It was meant to be the perfect day, the one I'd planned meticulously for months. The venue was a restored 19th-century estate nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, with ivy climbing the walls and a garden blooming with dahlias and roses. I, Amelia Rosewood, stood at the altar in a vintage lace gown I'd restored myself, feeling radiant despite its humble origins from an estate sale. My groom, Nathan, held my hand tightly, his thumb tracing soothing circles on my skin. He was a paramedic, brave, compassionate, the kind of man who ran toward danger to save lives. As the minister pronounced us husband and wife, my eyes involuntarily drifted to the front pew. 2 seats sat glaringly empty, adorned with elegant signs in silver calligraphy, "Mother of the Bride" and "Father of the Bride." I'd arranged the bouquets beside them personally, white lilies and eucalyptus, symbols of purity and strength. Before I dive deeper into this story, pause for a second and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Which city, which country? We love hearing from you all. It makes sharing these personal stories feel like we're connecting with friends. And after you've heard everything, be honest in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you forgive? Cut ties? Seek revenge? We read every single comment and they mean the world. Those empty seats weren't just vacant. They screamed absence. My parents, Harold and Evelyn Whitmore, hadn't shown. No phone call, no text, no last-minute excuse about traffic or illness. Nothing. On the day I'd dreamed about since childhood, they chose to vanish. The guests erupted in applause as Nathan and I kissed. I smiled for the cameras, tossed the bouquet, danced the first dance, but deep inside a fissure cracked open. For the past 8 years I'd been their financial lifeline. Silently, without demanding recognition, I'd paid down their massive mortgage on their upscale home in Charlotte. I'd covered credit card debts from extravagant shopping sprees, funded luxury vacations to Europe and the Caribbean, even helped buy their his and hers luxury sedans. They never once said thank you. Instead, they'd boast to friends about their good fortune, while dismissing my contributions as just what family does. At the reception under a tent strung with fairy lights, amid laughter and clinking glasses, I excused myself and stepped into the cool mountain air. My phone trembled in my hand. I called Mom first, voicemail, then Dad. He answered on the 4th ring. "Amelia," he said curtly, background noise suggesting he was outdoors. Dad. You didn't come. Why? Heavy pause. Then a dismissive chuckle. We couldn't make it, sweetheart. It just didn't feel right. My heart sank. What does that mean? The wedding, he explained casually, as if discussing the weather. A chapel in the mountains. That dress, it looked pre-owned. And Nathan. A paramedic. Blue-collar work, getting dirty, saving people who can't pay. What would we say to our neighbors at the country club? That our daughter married down. Tears pricked my eyes. Married down. I love him, Dad. He's a hero. Anyway, he continued unfazed, your brother Logan scored us VIP passes to that exclusive tennis tournament in Miami. Front row seats, celebrity sightings. Better investment of our weekend. Tennis. Over their daughter's wedding. I steadied my voice. Thanks for the honesty. I hung up, the phone slipping from my fingers momentarily. Nathan found me soon after, wrapping me in his arms as I finally let the sobs come. He was furious, confused, but mostly heartbroken for me. That night, in our honeymoon suite overlooking the mountains, sleep evaded me. Nathan held me close, but my mind raced through years of resentment, the monthly transfers that left me scraping by while building my small event planning business, Mountain Bloom Events, specializing in intimate, meaningful weddings. The times they'd praised Logan endlessly for his entrepreneurial spirit, despite his failed ventures that I secretly bailed out, while belittling my hobby business as not prestigious enough. By dawn, resolve hardened in my chest. Conditional love wasn't love. I wouldn't buy it anymore. 3 days later, back in our cozy bungalow in Asheville, I made the calls. The house in Charlotte. I'd co-signed the mortgage years ago when they faced foreclosure, and my payments had kept it afloat ever since. I contacted the bank, removed my name from all linked accounts, halted automatic payments. Then the utilities, the credit lines, everything I'd been supplementing quietly. It was all reversed. That evening, as Nathan and I unpacked wedding gifts, my phone rang. Amelia. The bank just called. Payments stopped. Your name's off the mortgage. I stood in our sunlit kitchen, watching Nathan arrange flowers from the wedding. Yes. I removed it. Silence. Then hysteria. We'll lose everything. This is our home, the one you grew up in. You were embarrassed by my wedding, I said calmly. By my husband. By me. You chose tennis over being there. That's absurd, she snapped. One event doesn't justify this. 8 years, I corrected. 8 years of funding your lifestyle while you treated me like an embarrassment. You're being vindictive. No, Mum. I'm setting boundaries. I hung up, hands steady for the first time. The next morning, Nathan glanced out the window while brewing coffee. Amelia. There's a white Range Rover pulling up. And knocking. He knew. Opening the door, there they stood. Dad in his golf polo, Mom clutching her designer bag, faces a mix of anger and feigned concern. Amelia Grace Whitmore, Mom hissed. What have you done? Come in, I said coolly. Dad barreled ahead. Bank notice. Foreclosure proceedings starting. You can't be serious. I am, I replied, sipping tea. You didn't show up to my wedding because it and I weren't fancy enough. Mom waved it off. It was one mistake. One. After years of me paying for your renovations, cruises, cars. While you fawned over Logan, who hasn't held a job in 6 years. Dad reddened. Logan's ambitious. And I'm the family ATM. You even had me covering his yacht club membership. They stammered. I continued. All I wanted was your presence at my wedding. Not money. Just you there supporting me. Mom softened falsely. You embarrassed us marrying a paramedic. No, I said firmly. I married a man who shows up. Who values me. That's worth more than your country club approval. Dad threatened. You'll regret this. I regret enabling you this long. I closed the door on their stunned faces. Family backlash exploded. Aunts texted about forgiveness. Cousins posted vague social media rants about ungrateful kids. Grandma Evelyn, Mom's mother, called, "Honey, whatever they did, good for you standing up. Blood doesn't mean blind loyalty." A week later, Logan called. "Amelia, Mom and Dad are panicking. Talking about moving in with me and my girlfriend. Can't you restart payments? For family." I laughed bitterly. "You want me to fix what they broke? They're old. This is cruel. Cruel is skipping your sister's wedding for tennis. Cruel is calling her an embarrassment." He grumbled. "Warn them at least. They never warned me, they saw me as lesser." Peace followed briefly. No demands, no guilt trips. Nathan and I focused on us. Hikes in the mountains, expanding my business, dreaming of kids. But karma moves slowly, then all at once. A month later, foreclosure notices hit. They'd burned savings on appearances, missing payments immediately. Nathan hugged me in the grocery store aisle. "Relieved, not guilty." "Relieved," I confirmed. Family painted me villain. Then Mom sent a photo. "For sale" sign in their yard. I whispered, "Finally." A handwritten letter from Dad arrived. Accusatory, cold, disowning me. I burned it in the fireplace, feeling lighter. Months passed. My business boomed. Word of mouth from authentic, heartfelt weddings. Nathan got promoted to lieutenant. Their house auctioned cheap. They downsized to a cramped apartment. The satisfying revenge. Not just their fall, but my rise and their public humiliation. At a high society charity gala in Charlotte, one I'd been invited to as a vendor, I attended with Nathan in uniform. Mom and Dad were there, corners cut, looking worn. They approached hesitantly. "Amelia," Mom whispered, eyes darting to onlookers. We were wrong. Please help us rebuild our image. Just a loan." I smiled sweetly. "Embarrassed to be seen with me now. Or just need money?" Dad pleaded quietly. "People are talking. About the foreclosure. About why our daughter cut us off." Nathan stepped forward. "Maybe tell them the truth. You skipped her wedding because it wasn't elite enough." Whispers spread as guests overheard. Their friends distanced themselves. I turned away. "You chose image over family. Live with it." Later, Logan lost his connections when word spread. My business. Featured in magazines as authentic luxury. Clients from their old circle booked me. Ironically, after hearing the story. Years on, I'm thriving. Bigger home, family started business empire. They struggling in obscurity. Revenge wasn't destruction. It was living well, unapologetically, while their world crumbled from choices they made. That empty seat day broke me open, but led to freedom. And that's the sweetest victory.